I'm Alice, a 35-year-old office worker. Since my husband David, who is 2 years younger than me, was transferred, we've been temporarily staying with my in-laws. It's meant to be a short-term arrangement, but David seems to be getting too comfortable here. While I'm eager to find a place of our own and move out as soon as possible, the main issue is that I just don't get along with my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, Susan. Her sarcasm, which was always present before our marriage, has only intensified since we started living together. Alice, haven't you gone shopping yet? Susan calls out with a hint of irritation. You missed the sale at the supermarket. You really need to get better at managing your time. Really? My company permits teleworking, but that doesn't change the fact that weekdays are still work hours for me. I can go shopping during the supermarket sale times. I've told you many times, Susan, I'm working during the day, so I can't shop until after 5 p.m. Susan, however, always finds a way to twist things. Always so high and mighty, and you still can't bear a child. Barren as you are, she snaps, as usual. David and I don't have children. We haven't pursued extensive medical testing, so we're not sure who might be the issue. I wanted children, but with David's earnings, expensive infertility treatments were beyond our reach. Susan's sarcasm was a problem even before we started living together, but it was more bearable when we were apart. Now, living under the same roof, I'm subjected to her sharp remarks around the clock. My father-in-law, Mike, doesn't direct his sarcasm at me, but his attitude is just as frustrating. He seems to view any woman over 30 as old, and now that I'm 35, he treats me like I'm practically a senior citizen. Hey, old lady, hand me the ashtray. Why are you wearing a skirt? Nobody wants to see an old woman's legs, Mike says with his usual dismissive tone. If I'm an old lady, then what does that make him at 60? I want to snap back, but I know it'll only make things worse. I'm not one to stay silent when I'm mistreated, so I often respond to my in-laws' rudeness. Unfortunately, this just earns me a reputation for being disrespectful and makes our relationship even more strained. The constant tension in the house is wearing me down, and I'm reaching my breaking point with living together. Meanwhile, David's work has become more demanding since his transfer, with increased weekend shifts and frequent business trips. We haven't had a chance to discuss moving out. Alice, I've got another business trip this weekend. You just had one yourself. Your new branch really requires a lot of travel, David says. His previous job involved overtime but very little weekend work or travel. Can't help it, right? Jobs change with the workplace. That's true, but this change is extreme. Because of it, we haven't been able to start looking for a new place, even though staying with my in-laws was supposed to be temporary. What if we end up stuck here indefinitely? I asked, my voice tinged with fear. Then one day, while unpacking David's bag after he returned from a business trip, I found a piece of paper tucked in a pocket. At first, I thought it was a receipt for his flight and hotel, but when I looked closer, I was stunned. It was a printed reservation for a hotel stay, complete with tickets to a theme park for 2 people. The date on the receipt was for yesterday, the same day David was supposed to be on his business trip. David's company is involved in seafood, not theme parks, so it's clear he wasn't on a business trip as he claimed. Instead, he spent 2 days at a theme park. The reservation for 2? It's a safe bet he went with someone else. As I stood there, stunned, I could hear David humming in the bathroom. It's a world of laughter, he sang, the theme song from a well-known attraction. He must be humming it, reminiscing about his time at the park. Although I'm certain the attraction isn't at the park he visited, it seems that on a trip like this, the specific attractions are irrelevant. Enraged, I considered confronting him in the bathroom, but just then, David's phone rang. Fueled by irritation and lacking composure, I picked up the call. Hello, I said, my voice sharp with anger. For a brief moment, I heard a young woman's voice on the other end of the line before the call abruptly ended. It had to be the woman David went to the theme park with, his mistress. When she heard my voice, she must have panicked and hung up. I immediately checked David's call history. Not being very security conscious, David's phone was probably protected by a simple password, likely his 4-digit birthday. I guessed correctly, and the phone unlocked without issue. What I found inside made my head spin. His phone was filled with irrefutable evidence of his affair, selfies with a young woman, all taken during times he claimed to be on business trips or working weekends. He was dangerously careless, leaving such explicit photos easily accessible. I scrolled through the call history once more and found a contact named Emily. I searched for that name in his social media friends list and opened their chat. David, I love you. I can't wait to become your wife. The message read. Emily, it seemed, was hoping to marry David. A home wrecker, perhaps? As I wrestled with this revelation, David emerged from the bathroom. Ah, I feel so refreshed, he said casually, drying his hair with a towel. I seized the moment to confront him. Refreshed? What exactly are you refreshed from? It looks like you've been enjoying yourself in more ways than one. Who's Emily? He asked, his face going pale as soon as I mentioned his mistress. So it's true. You've been lying about your business trips and spending time with a woman named Emily. I can't forgive you for these lies. How did you? What the? He stuttered. I pulled out his phone and showed him the damning evidence. This phone has all the evidence I need, I said firmly. You went through my phone. That's a breach of privacy. David protested. A man who cheats and shows such a blatant disregard for morals complaining about privacy is almost comical. If you didn't want this exposed, you should have protected your phone better. I made a promise when we married. No cheating, or it's an immediate divorce. I've always upheld that promise, and I can't continue being married to someone who pursues other women. It's time for us to get a divorce. To my surprise, David simply nodded in agreement. Yeah, I guess so, he said. His reaction was unexpected. I thought he would fight it more. Was he already bracing for a divorce the moment his affair came to light? I'll start preparing the paperwork tomorrow. You should talk to your parents, David said. His easy agreement surprised me, but once I make a decision, I stick to it. So this is the end of our married life. The next day, I felt a pang of sadness as reality set in. I left early in the morning to handle the divorce paperwork and run some errands. When I got back late at night, David and my in-laws were waiting for me. You're finally back. I was wondering where you'd disappeared to, Susan said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Given that David was there, they must have known about his affair and the impending divorce. Shouldn't they be offering apologies or at least acknowledging the situation before making snide comments? Instead of expressing any regret, Susan said something utterly shocking. Well, it's about time. I'm actually relieved you're leaving. I didn't want to see your face any longer, so it's good you were out all day. What do you mean by that? I asked, my voice edged with confusion as Susan gave me a smug smile. Just what I said, Susan sneered. I've grown tired of seeing your face. Even though David finally returned, you've been an obstacle. I tried to drive you out with my nagging, but you, with your lack of charm, just argued back, so I had to use my last resort. Last resort? I asked, puzzled. Susan's smile turned cunning. You know David's girlfriend's name, right? Yes, it's Emily. Interesting, Susan said with a smirk. I have a friend at my social club, Catherine. Her daughter is a very polite and charming 25-year-old minus 10 years younger than you. Young enough to start a family. Then Susan dropped a bombshell. So I introduced David to Catherine's daughter. What? I was stunned. I couldn't believe Susan would openly admit to such a thing. You're telling me, Susan, that you orchestrated David's affair? Oh, don't make it sound so dramatic. I merely facilitated an introduction, Susan said with a dismissive wave. I was horrified by Susan's bold confession. The idea of a mother deliberately setting up her son to cheat and then bragging about it to his wife was chilling. Well, it had to be done, Susan continued nonchalantly. David is our only child, and we need an heir. If you had managed to have a child, I might have been more accepting. But you chose to focus solely on your career and never had a baby. Mike nodded in agreement beside Susan, making it clear that he was aware of her actions. Do you understand? A 35-year-old woman who can't have children is no longer needed. Now that you get it, you should leave right away. Susan pointed at me with a triumphant look. After a brief pause, I replied, I understand your perspective perfectly. As you wish, I'll leave. I'll take all my belongings with me. Sure, do as you please. You don't have much anyway. Should I send someone to help you? Susan offered with a smirk, clearly misjudging the situation. But the real irony was on me. No need, I've already taken care of everything, I said calmly. Ha! Susan's surprise was evident as she noticed I wasn't upset or falling apart. Besides, Susan, I already knew you were helping David with his affair. I smirked at Susan. What do you think I was doing all day? If it had only been about preparing divorce paperwork, it wouldn't have taken so long. I spent the day arranging the move and meeting with Emily. What? You met with Emily? David's voice was filled with panic. Why wouldn't I? Did you think I wouldn't confront her after discovering your betrayal? When I found her number on your phone yesterday, I made sure to call her. With a resolute tone, I continued, poor Emily, though. When I called her and introduced myself as David's wife wanting to meet, she was stunned. Apparently, you told her you were single. I made sure she knew the whole truth. David, Susan, and Mike were visibly shocked. They hadn't expected me to take such decisive action in just one day. Emily was devastated when she realized she had been the other woman without knowing it, and Catherine was furious. She even considered suing for marriage fraud. I felt so sorry for her that I promised to support her in any way I could. What? David's voice trembled, and Susan looked equally stunned by Emily's unwitting involvement. I've decided not to seek compensation from Emily. Instead, I'll be increasing the compensation demanded from you, David, and from you too, Mike and Susan. Compensation? Why should we have to pay? Mike blurted out, panic rising in his voice. David may be responsible for his actions, but we're not involved, Mike added, clearly shocked. It seemed they had expected David to bear the full burden of compensation for his affair, never anticipating they would be held accountable as well. There's no such thing as a free pass. You're all involved. The emotional distress caused by your harassment as in-laws is more than enough reason for compensation, I said with a dismissive smile, leaving Mike grumbling in silence. And have you forgotten my profession? I work at a law firm. I'll be consulting with Michael, our head attorney, to determine the amount of compensation we can pursue. I had, of course, already contacted Michael at the firm earlier that day. What? Mike stammered in disbelief. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up to the front gate was heard. Ah, they're here. Hey, it's the moving service, I said with a broad smile, heading towards the door. Thank you for coming on such short notice. I apologize for the late request. No problem at all. We had a slot open for tonight's service, and it worked out perfectly since I finished my errands late, the mover said. Great. Please get started and be extra careful with the fragile items, I instructed as I welcomed them inside. Several movers began packing up my belongings, including my clothes, books, computer, and the appliances from the living room and kitchen. Wait a minute, I heard Susan's voice as the movers efficiently packed everything. Hey, don't take that. Those items belong to us, she protested. No, these are all mine, I said firmly. I brought them into the house when I moved in with David. The in-laws' house had only outdated appliances when we arrived. As someone who loves gadgets, I couldn't tolerate that, so I brought my own from my previous apartment. Susan has gotten used to them and mistakenly assumed they were hers. The robot vacuum, cordless cleaner, the multifunction oven, the IH cooking heater, the negative ion hair dryer, and the espresso machine. You're taking everything. How greedy, Susan shouted, trying to lunge at me, but David stepped in to stop her. Mom, it can't be helped. All those things belong to Alice, David said, clearly resigned to the situation. Susan wasn't ready to concede, though. Once you've experienced the convenience of modern appliances, you'll find it hard to go back. If you're unhappy, you can always buy new ones. Though, after paying the compensation, I doubt you'll have the funds for such luxuries. As the movers continued to load my belongings onto the truck, I directed them, please deliver these to my new address. I'll meet you there. I watched as the moving truck pulled away before getting into my own car. Where's that truck going? David called out, his voice tinged with concern. Where's the truck going? To my apartment, of course. The one I owned before your transfer. I put it up for sale with a real estate agent when you were transferred, but the price was set too high, and it never sold. I never let it go, despite the agent's repeated suggestions to lower the price. Who would have thought it would come to this? I fastened my seatbelt and chuckled. In a way, I might have been prepared for this. David looked bewildered. I set the asking price higher than market value on purpose so it wouldn't sell, allowing me to return if necessary, I explained. David sank to his knees, overwhelmed by my revelation. You heartless woman, he muttered. Susan charged at me, shoving me aside while yelling. As I groaned in pain from the impact, she attempted to attack further by throwing a cutting board at me. Just then, a black figure darted into the fray, colliding with Susan and sending her sprawling to the ground with a startled cry. Thank you, Midnight, I said as I gathered the stray cat Midnight into my arms. I quickly climbed into the moving truck and sped away from the chaos. I wasn't sure why Midnight appeared, but with his strong sense of justice, he must have come to my rescue. I promised to reward him with some treats later. Following the incident, David and I finalized our divorce. My law firm filed for compensation from David and his parents. Michael, the head attorney, took on the case pro bono, using it as an opportunity to mentor the younger associates. Despite the young lawyers handling parts of the case, I felt reassured by Michael's experience and support. Michael also took on Emily's lawsuit, pursuing both criminal and civil charges with renewed enthusiasm, as it had been a while since he handled a criminal case. After paying compensation to Emily and me, David's parents will likely have to sell their house, and it still might not cover everything. The idea of them facing a life of debt and poverty almost brings a smirk to my face. Now that I'm single, life without David and his deceitful parents feels like a breath of fresh air. For now, I'll revel in my carefree single life in my apartment, enjoying the company of Midnight, the stray cat I brought with me.